I was running late for what was meant to be the most important evening of my life. Dinner with my fiancé's mysterious and infamously strict billionaire father. On the way there, I gave the only food I had and the luxurious cashmere scarf from my neck to an elderly man shivering on a bench in the park. He looked cold, hungry, and completely alone. By the time I rushed into the opulent dining hall of the estate, breathless, flustered, and clearly late, I stopped in my tracks. There he was, the same man I had just helped, now seated confidently at the head of the table. Before we dive deeper into what happened next, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to subscribe. It helps us keep bringing you more unbelievable moments like this one. All right, let's rewind to how it all began. The invitation didn't feel like an invitation at all, more like a legal summons. It arrived as an email from a high-end law firm, worded so formally it may as well have been a court order. Mr. Arthur Sterling requests the attendance of his son, Mr. David Sterling, and his partner, Ms. Ava Peters, for a formal dinner at his private estate. For the past 2 years of our relationship, David had simultaneously longed for and dreaded this moment. His father was a ghost, a myth in the world of finance, a man who had built a vast fortune from nothing and then disappeared from the public eye nearly a decade ago, isolating himself behind the walls of his grand estate. Rumors described him as brilliant, reclusive, and nearly impossible to please. He had even cut off David's older brother for marrying someone he disapproved of. And now, I was next in line for inspection. The days leading up to the dinner were pure torture. David, normally confident and grounded, was unraveling by the hour. "Ava, you don't get it," he said more than once. "This isn't just dinner. It's a trial. Everything with him is a test. Our future, our wedding, all of it depends on his approval." He handed me a checklist of topics to avoid, like landmines. Don't talk about your nonprofit job. He considers charity a sign of weakness. Don't bring up your modest upbringing. Stick to safe topics: art, economics, history. Wear the navy dress I picked out and the cashmere scarf. Appearance matters to him. And whatever you do, he warned, wide-eyed and deadly serious, don't be late. He sees lateness as a sign of chaos and poor character. That morning, I felt more like I was preparing for a stage audition than meeting family. I practiced polite small talk in the mirror. I ironed every wrinkle out of my dress and scarf. My stomach was a tight ball of dread. I was so obsessed with nailing every detail of this absurd, high-stakes performance, I nearly forgot to act like a person. I took the train to his town, a secluded, wealthy suburb just an hour outside the city. David had already gone ahead to prepare. I planned to catch a taxi from the station, but when I stepped onto the platform, the pressure of it all was so overwhelming I felt like I couldn't breathe. So, I decided to walk the last mile, just to feel grounded, to breathe in the air and calm my racing thoughts. As I walked through streets lined with towering hedges and multi-million-dollar mansions, I couldn't help but feel out of place, like an outsider, wandering into a world I didn't belong to. I checked the time. I still had about 20 minutes. I'd be fine. And then I saw him. It happened on a small green space near the edge of the road, trimmed grass, spotless paths, and polished benches. Everything looked pristine, perfectly manicured. Except for one thing. An elderly man sat alone on a bench, bundled in thin, rumpled clothing that did little to block the chill in the late afternoon air. His face was weathered, his posture tired, and his jacket looked barely held together. He didn't belong in this picture-perfect town. He looked forgotten, cold, hungry, and heartbreakingly alone. Everything in me said to keep walking. David's voice echoed in my head. Don't stop. Don't be late. Don't show up looking disheveled. But then I caught a glimpse of his eyes. Clear, intelligent, and filled with something I hadn't expected. Quiet sorrow. Something about it stopped me in my tracks. And in that moment, my grandmother's words, long buried in memory, rose to the surface. How you treat someone who can offer you nothing says everything about who you are. Forget the rules, forget the scarf, forget the test. I turned and walked toward him. "Excuse me, sir," I said softly. "Are you all right?" He looked up, and even though his face was aged and worn, his eyes were alert, sharp even. "Just a bit cold, miss," he replied, his voice dry and raspy. "And it seems I missed the lunch drop at the shelter today." I opened my bag and pulled out the sandwich I had packed for the train, turkey and Swiss on whole wheat. It was all I had, but I handed it to him without thinking. "It's not fancy," I said, "but it's yours if you'd like." He looked at the sandwich, then at me, his gaze steady, unreadable, and then accepted it with a small nod. "Thank you," he murmured. "That's very kind of you." As he unwrapped it, I saw him shiver again. I hesitated. Then, almost on instinct, I reached for the soft cashmere scarf around my neck, the one David had practically demanded I wear, and gently placed it over the man's thin shoulders. "You need this more than I do," I said. For a long second, he didn't say anything. He just looked at me, not with confusion or pity, but with clarity, like he was really seeing me. "You're a rare soul," he said finally. I smiled faintly, nodded, and checked the time. My stomach sank. I was late. Not just behind schedule, actually late. Heart racing, I gave him a polite goodbye and hurried down the road, feet pounding the pavement, mind spiraling. David had warned me, begged me, pleaded with me not to be late. And now, I'd done exactly what he feared. I hadn't even set foot in the mansion yet, and I had already failed the one rule that mattered most to his father. But what I didn't realize, not then, was that I had just passed a test far more important than his. I practically sprinted the rest of the way, my heels sinking into the carefully trimmed grass, breath catching in my throat, heart hammering against my ribs. The estate gates loomed ahead, tall, ornate, and impossibly intimidating. Golden initials curled through the iron like vines. I pressed the intercom button, my voice trembling as I announced, "Ava Peters. I'm here to see Mr. Sterling." There was a long pause, so long in fact that I thought maybe no one would answer. Then, with a heavy metallic groan, the gates slowly swung open. I hurried up the winding drive, flanked by towering oak trees that arched over the path like a royal canopy. It didn't feel like a driveway. It felt like I was entering a kingdom. And then I saw the mansion. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress. A vast 3-story stone estate with wings that stretched like the arms of some ancient beast. The windows stared down like eyes, judging. At the top of the grand front steps stood David. He wasn't smiling. He was pacing, his phone clutched in a white-knuckled hand. As soon as he saw me running up the steps, his face twisted into something between panic and fury. "Ava," he hissed, storming toward me. "Where the hell have you been?" He grabbed my arm, eyes wide, voice sharp and quiet like he didn't want the house to hear. "You're late, 17 minutes late. I told you he hates that. This is a disaster." "I'm sorry," I panted. "I know, I was walking and there was a man, an old man on a bench. He looked so cold and His eyes darkened, like I'd spoken a language he couldn't understand. "An old man?" he echoed. "You stopped. For a homeless man?" I nodded. He looked hungry. I gave him my sandwich. David's gaze dropped to my neck, or rather, the empty space where the scarf had been. "Where's the scarf?" he asked, his voice now dangerously calm. "The scarf I told you to wear?" "I gave it to him," I said. He was shivering. "You gave away the $700 scarf," he said, blinking like he couldn't believe his own ears. "To a stranger, before the most important meeting of your life. What were you thinking?" His words weren't just harsh, they were cruel. But beneath that cruelty, I could see what was really going on. He was scared, not angry, not disgusted, just a grown man reduced to a frightened child, desperate for approval from a father who never gave it. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't his partner. I was part of his performance, an accessory, a risk. The version of me who once would have crumbled under that look. She was gone. Instead, I stood up straighter and said nothing, because I knew what I had done, and I knew why I had done it. I had chosen humanity over appearances, warmth over perfection, and if that meant I didn't fit into the Sterling world, so be it. That's when the front doors creaked open. The grand doors creaked open, revealing a butler so tall and thin he looked like he'd stepped out of a Gothic painting. Dressed in crisp black and white, his face was blank, unreadable. "Mr. Sterling will see you now," he said, his voice as dry as parchment. David quickly adjusted his tie, his hands shaking slightly. He grabbed my hand. It was clammy and cold. "Just let me do the talking," he whispered, eyes darting nervously. "Smile. Be polite. Don't say anything weird. And for God's sake, don't mention the bench. Or the scarf." Without waiting for a reply, he pulled me through the doorway. The foyer was vast, more cathedral than home. Our steps echoed across the polished black and white marble floor. Expensive paintings lined the walls, their subjects frozen in permanent judgment. It didn't feel like a house. It felt like a gallery of power. Cold, immaculate. The butler led us through a silent corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly. Each step made my chest tighter. I wasn't walking. I was marching toward a verdict. I squeezed David's hand. He didn't squeeze back. Finally, the butler stopped before two enormous wooden doors. "Mr. Sterling is waiting for you in the dining room," he announced. And then, a voice, low, gravelly, male. It drifted through the doors, oddly familiar. My heart skipped a beat. Number it couldn't be. I was imagining it. The doors opened. The dining room was palatial. A long, dark wood table extended like a runway under an unlit crystal chandelier. The ceilings arched high above like a cathedral dome. At the far end of the table, seated in a tall back chair that resembled a throne, was a man. A single place setting sat in front of him. David leaned in, still whispering anxious instructions, but I wasn't listening. I wasn't even breathing. My eyes locked on the figure at the head of the table. My mind screamed, "It's not him! It's not him!" But then the man shifted slightly, adjusted something around his neck, and I saw it. A familiar flash of color and softness, draped elegantly over his shoulders. My scarf. The one I had wrapped around the homeless man just an hour earlier. My entire body froze. I felt rooted to the floor. David finally noticed I'd stopped walking. "Ava, what is it? Why are you—" He followed my gaze and saw his father, the old man from the bench. David's reaction was instant and almost childlike. The color drained from his face. His spine, once stiff with anxiety, seemed to collapse inward. His mouth fell open, and a strangled sound, half gasp, half squeak, escaped his lips. "Father," he croaked. What are you wearing? Are you feeling all right?" But the man at the end of the table didn't respond. He didn't even glance at David. His gaze was fixed squarely on me, those same clear, knowing blue eyes. And then he smiled. It was warm, familiar, the exact smile he'd given me on the park bench. "Welcome, Ava," he said, voice calm, kind, and unmistakable. Please, come in. Sit down. I couldn't move. My brain was still trying to reconcile two impossible truths. The man in the scarf, the man in the throne. David, now trembling, hissed beside me. That's him, he whispered, eyes wide. The homeless man? That was the man on the bench? Arthur Sterling finally turned toward his son. The warmth vanished from his face like a light extinguished. Surprised to see me, David? He asked coolly. You shouldn't be. His tone was sharper now, hard and deliberate. You, more than anyone, should know what I value most. Not titles, not money, not appearances, but character. Real, quiet character. The kind that doesn't need an audience. He gestured toward the empty chairs lining the long table. I've had men and women of influence sit right where you're standing. Fortune 500 heirs, corporate leaders, all dressed to impress, all saying what they think I want to hear. He paused, then exhaled, slow and heavy. But it's all an act, just polished performance. He turned back to me, and in that moment, the softness returned, the kindness. And then today, she walked in. He pointed gently toward me. She was late, clearly under pressure. She knew this meeting mattered. She understood she was being judged, and yet she stopped. For someone who had nothing to offer her in return. He motioned toward the scarf draped around his shoulders, then to the sandwich resting on a porcelain plate beside him. She gave what she had, her food, her warmth, her attention, not because she wanted something, but because it was right. Arthur's voice dropped to a near whisper, heavy with meaning. She failed your test, David, but she passed mine, with distinction. He smiled again, at me, not his son, a smile that felt like the sun breaking through the clouds. Then he gestured to the chair beside him. Come, sit with me, Ava. We have a wedding to plan and a future to discuss. He looked back at David, who now stood motionless, pale, and visibly unraveling. You're welcome to stay, Arthur said, voice cool. Or not. The choice is finally yours. I felt my feet finally move, as if the floor had released its grip on me. Step by step, I made my way down the long mahogany table, the silence swallowing the sound of my heels as if the house itself was listening. I reached the chair beside Arthur, the seat of honor, and slowly sat down. David, after a long pause, finally found the strength to follow. He walked like a man in exile, shoulders slumped, and took a seat at the far end of the table, as distant from his father as the room allowed. Seconds later, the butler returned, silent as a shadow, pushing a silver cart with the first course. He began placing dishes in front of us with choreographed precision. Arthur didn't look at David, not once. His attention remained fully on me. He didn't ask about my resume, or my net worth, or my lineage. He asked about me. What book are you reading right now? He began, his voice lighter now, almost conversational. For a moment, I hesitated, but then I answered honestly. I told him about the novel I'd been devouring in my spare time. He smiled and asked what I liked about it. Then he asked about my work. David had begged me not to mention it, but I did. I told Arthur the truth about the nonprofit I worked for, the kids I mentored, the community garden we were building in a struggling part of the city. He listened, not politely, intently. He asked thoughtful questions about the neighborhood, the funding, the long-term plans. Not once did he look unimpressed. Then came the questions about my childhood. I told him about my parents, a nurse and a teacher, who had raised me in a tiny house filled with books, secondhand furniture, and unconditional love. They sound like extraordinary people, Arthur said softly, and they raised a remarkable daughter. Between courses, he reached up and gently removed the scarf from his shoulders, the same one I had placed on the old man in the park. He folded it carefully, reverently, and held it out to me. "I believe this belongs to you," he said, his eyes sparkling with quiet amusement. I took it. It was still warm. "Thank you," he said. It brought me great comfort. I felt something shift in the room, something deep. This wasn't dinner. This was a message. He wasn't just getting to know me. He was showing his son exactly what he had failed to see. Everything David had asked me to hide, my job, my background, my kindness, those were the very things his father valued most. And David knew it. When the meal ended, Arthur stood from his chair with surprising grace for a man his age. He walked with us to the front doors himself. No butler, no formality. Before we left, he finally turned to his son. "You have an extraordinary woman in your life, David," he said. His voice was low but steady. "Don't ever make the mistake of undervaluing her, or the values she lives by." Then came the final blow. "Your future in my company and in my life is secure, not because of what you did tonight, but entirely because of her." He didn't wait for a reply. We walked out in silence. The car ride home was just as quiet. David stared at the road, hands gripping the wheel like it was the only thing holding him together. His jaw was tight, his expression unreadable. When we stepped into our small apartment, the silence shattered. David sat on the edge of the couch and broke. He cried, not out of anger or frustration, but deep, soul-crushing shame. He apologized for the way he had acted, for the pressure, for the 2 years of trying to shape me into someone his father would approve of, for not seeing me. It was raw, honest, human. And in that moment, I saw the real David, not the polished, desperate son, but a man who was finally ready to grow. That was the true beginning of our relationship. 3 months later, we got married. It wasn't some lavish society event. It was small, quiet, beautiful, in my parents' backyard, under a canopy of sunlight and homemade decorations. And Arthur Sterling was there, not as a legend or a billionaire, but as family. He wore a tailored suit, but around his shoulders, just like before, was the same soft scarf, the one I had given without expectation. And as I stood there, saying vows to a more humble, more deserving man, I thought about the nature of tests. I had walked into that mansion terrified of failing David's checklist, the scarf, the punctuality, the image, and I had failed it spectacularly. But in doing so, I passed the only test that truly mattered, the test of character. Because in the end, real worth isn't defined by your bank account, or who your parents are, or how expensive your clothes look. It's defined by what you do when no one's watching. It's defined by how you treat someone who can never repay you, by the warmth you offer a stranger shivering on a park bench. This wasn't just a love story. It was a story about integrity, about choosing compassion, even when the world tells you not to. And sometimes, that's the most powerful choice of all.